Hello everyone and welcome back to the Dungeon Learner's Guide. Today we have another Commander's Guild deck tech. This is our 57th deck and it's titled Fling Fang Foom. And if you haven't seen this show before, what we are doing is randomly selecting a card from scryfall.com, working with a budget of $100 or less, and building a commander deck for Magic the Gathering around a theme of the chosen card. So really quickly, before we get into all of the deck tech, I want to make sure to highlight some of our social media accounts. If you are interested in following us over on Twitter, you can do that at 13POYNZ, over on Reddit at u/POYNZ13. Backwards, I know. And then you can also send us an email at dungeonlearnersguide@gmail.com. If you're ever interested in talking to us, letting us know what you think of the decks, or maybe even suggesting future cards to be featured on the channel, those are great ways to reach out to us, and I really do appreciate hearing from everybody over there. After that, if you're looking to support our content a little bit more directly, you can head on over to our TCG Player affiliate link, which is down in the description for this video. And any cards you buy, so maybe you're interested in picking up the cards to put this deck together, for example, we get a little bit of kickback from anything that you purchase using our link. So we do appreciate the support over there. And then finally, if you're interested in giving us a little bit more direct support, you can go and find us over on Patreon. That link is also in the description below. We're just the Dungeon Learner's Guide over there. And we have several different tiers available at $3, $5, and $7 a month. As a thank you for supporting us over there, though. We do give access to deck lists a week early. We make sure to give our Patreons first shot at maybe being in some of the games. If you would like to play on any games in the channel, you can join us over there. And then, of course, you also could get access to the unedited gameplay videos, so you could get to hear the commentary from the players while they're playing, and just the unedited game without the voiceover on top of it. So if that's something you're interested in, please do check us out. And of course, I want to give a massive shout out to our Patreon, William Swiftfoot. Thank you very much for supporting us. And if none of these things are your thing, I suppose, you can always, of course, just like the video and subscribe to the channel. That really does help out a lot. So thank you very much to everyone who's watching the show. We appreciate all of the support. And I think that means it's probably about time we get into our deck tech. So this week, we have a suggested card for our random card, which is suggested to us on Reddit by BearsFan1235. I don't think that's a typo. I'm pretty sure it is just 1235, but I really wanted to say 1234 there, so I apologize, Bears fan, if I messed up your name at all. And the suggested card that they gave us was Spikeshot Goblin. And Spikeshot Goblin is 2 and a red for a 1/2 Goblin Shaman. And you can pay a red, tap it, and Spikeshot Goblin deals damage equal to its power to target creature or player. So Spikeshot Goblin, super interesting. And I actually looked up online to see what decks played Spikeshot Goblin, and it's almost all Goblin Tribal. And I'll be honest, I really didn't want to do Goblin Tribal. It felt, as bad as it sounds, a little too easy to just take a Goblin and throw it into a deck. So I went a little bit of a different direction. And I also, let's take a look at the commander, cheated a little bit because I'm not playing a legal commander for this deck. I added green to it, so we are red-green for this week. And our commander is Arlinn Kord. And I know Planeswalkers aren't supposed to be your commanders, but I love Arlinn. I think she's great. And she actually works very well with what our deck theme is trying to do this week. So if people don't like it, I do have a backup commander in the deck as well. But I'm a big fan of Arlinn, so put her in the command zone, and we'll see how it goes. But if you don't know what Arlinn does, first off, she is a double-sided card because she is a werewolf, so she does have a backside as well. And Arlinn Kord, the front side, for 2 red and a green, you get a 3 loyalty Planeswalker Arlinn. And +1 until end of turn, up to 1 target creature gets +2/+2 and gains vigilance and haste. 0, put a 2/2 green wolf creature token onto the battlefield and transform Arlinn Kord. On the backside, once it's transformed, you can +1, creatures you control get +1/+1 and gain trample until end of turn. -1, Arlinn Embraced by the Moon deals 3 damage to target creature or player. Transform Arlinn Embraced by the Moon. And -6, You get an emblem with creatures you control have haste, and tap this creature deals damage equal to its power to target creature or player. Now, I said that this synergized super well with our deck, and you may notice that Arlinn Embraced by the Moon's ultimate ability, that -6, is very similar to Spikeshot Goblin's ability to tap and deal damage equal to its power to target creature or player. So that is what this deck is all about. And if we jump into our themes, we can talk a little bit more about that, because our first theme are creatures that want to do damage to creatures or players based on their power. Most of them, we can pay mana into it or tap them to do it. Hate Flayer here is a bit of a weird case, and so I kind of wanted to showcase him a little bit. But he is 5 red for an elemental creature. He's a 5/5 and has Wither, so it deals damage to creatures in the form of -1/-1 counters. And you can pay 2 and a red and untap Hate Flayer to deal damage equal to its power to target creature or player. So instead of tapping it like we would with Spikeshot Goblin or with Arlinn, we have to untap Hate Flayer. However, this is going to pair super well with Arlinn, because if we can ever ultimate our commander, we tap Hate Flayer to do 5 damage to something, pay 3 mana, untap it, do 5 more damage to something, tap it again, and we can go off with Hate Flayer if we're able to get that combination going. Not super likely, because a -6 on a Planeswalker in Commander is going to be very difficult to achieve, but I think Hate Flayer also does a good job of showcasing what we're all about. We want to take our big creatures and just throw that damage at our opponent's faces, essentially. And speaking of throwing damage at our opponent's faces, we also have some cards in here that care about sacrificing creatures to deal damage equal to their power. So Thud, for example, is 1 red for a sorcery that says, as an additional cost to cast the spell, sacrifice a creature, and Thud deals damage equal to the sacrificed creature's power to any target. So, for example, if we sacrifice Hate Flayer, we do 5 damage to anything we want. Now, overall, looking at the cards we've listed so far, you may notice that they're not super powerful. Spikeshot Goblin was a 1/2, Hate Flayer's a 5/5, Arlinn makes 2/2s. We don't have a ton of power in this deck. And so our third theme is making sure we can get that power on board. That's where we have auras. Colossification, for example, is 5 green for an enchantment aura, enchant creature. When Colossification enters the battlefield, tap enchanted creature, which honestly might be an upside if we target Hate Flayer. But the important part is that it also says enchanted creature gets +20/+20. If we put Colossification on Hate Flayer, we then have a 25 power creature that we can pay 3 mana, untap it, and do 25 damage to any creature or player. All we have to do is do that twice, and we kill somebody from their starting life total. So Colossification is by far one of the best enchantments we have that we can put on something, but we have a ton of different auras that want to equip to our various creatures, although I suppose equip probably isn't the right word. Attach? I don't know. Let me know what the correct term is for putting an aura on something. I guess it's just enchant, but I don't know. Equip sounds right. But we do have a ton of stuff that cares about that in the deck as well. So those are the themes for this deck, and I suppose with that out of the way, we should take a quick look at some key cards in the deck, some cards that we would really love to get into play if we could. The first of which pairs very well with some of the auras that we just mentioned. That is Storm Herald. So Storm Herald is 2 and a red for a human shaman, 3/2 with haste. When Storm Herald enters the battlefield, return any number of aura cards from your graveyard to the battlefield attached to creatures you control. Exile those auras at the beginning of your next end step. If those auras would leave the battlefield, exile them instead of putting them anywhere else. So if we have a ton of auras in our graveyard, Storm Herald comes in, puts them on our creatures, maybe, preferably, putting them all on one creature so it can tap and do damage and possibly knock somebody out of the game. But it's also relevant to note that if we put Colossification on something with Storm Herald's ability, the tap trigger from Colossification is just that. It's a trigger, which means we can respond to it. So if we put Colossification on Storm Herald, and he also gets the ability to tap to deal damage to something, we can still tap him to deal damage before he's tapped by Colossification. So that is incredibly important because Storm Herald does let you put auras on other creatures, so you might want to put Colossification on your Spikeshot Goblin and then activate Spikeshot Goblin before it can be tapped. So just in case you were worried, that is the rules there. So not too terrible. Colossification tapping the creature isn't the worst thing that could happen, but still probably not ideal. And so that's Storm Herald. Our second key card in the deck is going to be Soul's Majesty, which is 4 and a green for a sorcery, and it says draw cards equal to the power of target creature you control. Since we're making absolutely massive creatures, even just Storm Herald with a Colossification on it is 23 power. Soul's Majesty is often going to be 5 mana to draw 20 plus cards, which is insane. That's an absolutely crazy value for 5 mana. So obviously not an instant, so it does lose a little bit there, but absolutely perfect for what we're trying to do, because we can't exactly, knock our opponents out with all of our creatures and auras if we don't have creatures and auras in our hand. So it is very important that we refill our hand, especially if our opponents are able to deal with the creatures that we had on board. So an awesome include in the deck. And our next key card is going to be Chandra's Ignition, which is 3 red for a sorcery, and it says target creature you control deals damage equal to its power to each other creature and each opponent. So notably, this does not hit us, but it does hit everything else on the table. And so if we had Storm Herald, which has Colossification on it, so it's a 23 power creature, for 5 mana, we can do 23 damage to every single creature except Storm Herald and every single opponent that we have. There's a good chance that we might have a creature with more than 23 power, or our opponents might just be at lower life totals, meaning we can just start knocking people out of the game with Chandra's Ignition. So incredibly useful and incredibly powerful if we're able to get some massive creatures onto the board, but a key card because honestly, this is pretty much a game winner whenever we cast it. So an absolutely phenomenal card and very worthy of the almost $6.50 price tag, but I will say I do wish it were cheaper. I would love to put this in a lot more decks. So those are the key cards for the deck. Next, I think it's important to look at some cool interactions in the deck, some cards that work very well together. The first of which is going to be between Malignus and Jeska Thrice Reborn. So Malignus is 3 red for an elemental spirit star, and Malignus's power and toughness are each equal to half the highest life total among your opponents, rounded up. Damage that would be dealt by Malignus can't be prevented. So already, Malignus is, if everyone's at 40 life, a 20/20 for only 5 mana, which is an absolutely insane rate. We want to get this down as quickly as we can because it starts taking away opponents' life totals like nobody's business. And it gets even stronger if we partner that up with Jeska Thrice Reborn, which is 2 and a red, legendary planeswalker Jeska, 0 loyalty, but she does enter the battlefield with a loyalty counter on her for each time you've cast a commander from the command zone this game. And you can pay 0 and choose target creature until your next turn. If that creature would deal combat damage to one of your opponents, it deals triple that damage to that player instead. That is what we are talking about. That's what we want with Malignus right there. Now, Jeska does have a -X. She deals X damage to each of up to 3 targets. That's not going to be super relevant for us. I'm sure there will be times when it comes in handy, but for the most case, we really want that 0 ability. Because with Malignus, if we triple Malignus's combat damage, that is a one-shot kill to any opponent at the table with no exceptions. Because if anyone is below the maximum life total, then let's just use 40 as an example. If there's one player at 40, anyone else is about to take 120 damage. They're not surviving that. And no matter what the maximum life is for an opponent, If someone is, say, 300 life, that's okay. We'll just do a casual 450 damage to them. So no matter what, Malignus plus Jessica to triple the damage is always going to be a one-shot kill unless our opponent has an infinite amount of life, because I don't think infinite times infinite is more than infinite, but I feel like now I'm getting into things I don't fully understand, so I'm just going to say it's going to kill anybody, and I guess we'll move on to the next cool interaction. So our next cool interaction is going to be between Alpha Authority and Frenzied Rage. So some very nice auras in the deck that really work well with what we're trying to do here. And we have Alpha Authority, which is 1 and a green for an enchantment aura, enchant creature. Enchanted creature has hexproof and can't be blocked by more than one creature. Already great, because if we give hexproof, there's not much our opponents can do to kill it, and making it so that it can't be blocked by more than one creature, there's not much on the board that's going to be bigger than the stuff that we have, so there's a very good chance we survive the attacks. And if we partner that up with Frenzied Rage, which is 1 and a red for an enchantment aura, enchant creature, enchanted creature gets +2/+1 and has menace, so it can't be blocked except by 2 or more creatures. Now, I think I know what you're thinking. Zach, why would we want to be blocked by more than one creature, but also not be blocked by more than one creature? And the answer to that is very simple, because if we have Alpha Authority and Frenzied Rage on a creature, it has to be blocked by more than 2 creatures, and has to be blocked by only one creature, meaning that our opponents cannot legally assign any blockers to this creature, essentially making it completely unblockable permanently for 4 mana, plus giving it hexproof, and +2/+1. So if we could put this on Malignus, for example, what are our opponents going to do? They can't block it, they can't really kill it unless they board wipe. It makes life incredibly difficult for what our opponents are trying to do. So I'm a big fan of this interaction. I imagine there will be some people sitting across the table that may not be as big of a fan, but I think it's pretty cool, and I think being cool definitely earns it a spot in the cool interactions. So that is the vast majority of our deck. The only last major piece of this is to take a look at price, and the actual budget of this deck came in at $84.42, so about $16 below our budget limit, which is pretty good. And surprisingly, though, even though we're still so far below our budget limit at $16, the most expensive card in the deck could cut that down way more if you decide to cut it, and that is Eldrazi Conscription, which is at $13.34. So you could drop the price of this deck down to almost $60 just by cutting out this one card. And Eldrazi Conscription is definitely worth a slot in the deck, but for budget reasons, if you did need to cut it, that would make sense. So Eldrazi Conscription is 8 mana for a tribal enchantment, Eldrazi Aura. It enchants a creature. An enchanted creature gets +10/+10, Trample, and Annihilator 2. So again, a massive aura that we want to put on our creatures to start flinging some damage around, but it also gives the creature Trample, which is super useful because we're going to have a massive creature. And it gives Annihilator 2, so when it attacks, defending player sacrifices 2 permanents. That can be absolutely backbreaking in games where our opponents may have missed out on some lands, or they've recently had their board wiped and they have to sacrifice some lands. So can be very useful in the right situation, but it is a $13 card, so if you need to trim the price a little bit, this is definitely the card to cut. On the other hand, though, maybe you're looking to increase the price of this deck, and if that is the case, or you're just looking to power it up a bit, I do have some out-of-budget upgrades. Now, this week we don't have a ton of out-of-budget upgrades. We really only have the one, but it's a pretty good one. And in this case, it is Xenagos, God of Revels. 3 green, red for a legendary enchantment creature god, 6/5 with indestructible. As long as your devotion to red and green is less than 7, Xenagos is not a creature. And at the beginning of combat on your turn, another target creature you control gains haste and gets +X/+X until end of turn, where X is that creature's power. So Xenaghost just lets us double a creature's power and toughness until end of turn every single time we go to combat. And again, we have some big creatures on the board. So all we need is something like, say, Malignus, whose power and toughness is equal to half of the highest opponent's life total. And all of a sudden, Malignus becomes, well, the highest opponent's life total. It just one-shots somebody out of nowhere. So Xenaghost is phenomenal. Even if we're not sacrificing our creatures and throwing them at our opponents, which we can still do, we can also still just attack, which is kind of crazy, given the fact that we're all about tapping and dealing damage. But if we have big creatures, attacking might not be the worst idea in the world. So Xenaghost definitely earns a spot in the out-of-budget upgrades. And I could have squeezed him in. He is technically in the budget, but I didn't want to go too close to $100, and I felt that this was a fair one to exclude from the deck for right now. But if you have one floating around or you don't mind shelling out $14.85, definitely a good upgrade for the deck. But that is the deck tech itself, and I think the last piece of this is to see how the deck actually performs in a game. So we are going to jump into a game with 3 different opponents for this week and see how we do. The first opponent we have is Adeliz the Cinderwind, being played by Shawn, Anawan the Ruin Thief, being played by Jason, and Prosper Tomebound, being played by Bilal. So starting with Shawn's Adeliz deck, this is a wizard tribal deck. He wants to play a ton of wizards, get a bunch of instants and sorceries, and just kind of pump up a team of not a ton of wizards, but enough to make an impact, and slowly just kind of value out his opponents by drawing cards, burning them out, and then running them over with the wizards. So I think we can probably do okay against Adeliz. I think our creatures are going to be bigger, but I am worried that he might go a little bit wider than we do and start to chip in damage that we can't really stop. So I'll be interested to see how that one goes. Next up, we have Jason's Anawan deck, which is a rogue tribal deck. So it's part mill, part rogue tribal that wants to do damage. And I think overall this isn't the worst deck for us to see across the table, because we did mention earlier that we do have Storm Herald. So it would be really nice if he milled a ton of our auras and then we just drop a Storm Herald and knock somebody out of the game. But I think that's kind of a wishful thinking kind of line. But other than that, I do think that we can probably handle the rogues. I think we're going to be bigger. My main concern is that they might be unblockable or have flying or some other way that we can't really deal with it. So I'm interested to see how that one goes. And then finally, we have Bilal's Prosper Tomebound deck, which is all about casting spells from exile and making a ton of treasure tokens. And he, very similar to Adeliz, kind of wants to get a ton of value, but instead of drawing cards and things like that, he actually just wants to make a ton of mana. So all about sacrificing treasures and making artifacts and everything like that. And overall, I think that with that deck, we might do okay. I think it's important that we get our attackers or our tappers on board before he can get a ton of artifacts and a ton of mana, but we'll see how that goes. And those are all of our opponents for this week, and I'm very excited for this game. I do really enjoy the commanders that we're sitting down to play against. I think that it's going to be a fun game, so I hope you all enjoy it as well, and I will talk to you all once it's done. At the start of the game, I go first, followed by Shawn, Jason, and then Bilal. On my first turn, I play a mountain. Shawn plays a Prismari Campus. Jason plays an island. Bilal plays a command tower and casts Disciple of the Vault, doing 1 damage to target opponent whenever an artifact goes to the graveyard from the battlefield. I play a forest. Shawn plays an island and casts Burning Prophet, which gets +1/+0, and Shawn scries 1 whenever he casts a non-creature spell. Jason plays a Drowned Catacombs and casts Scheming Symmetry, letting him and I both search our libraries for a card and put it on top. Bilal plays a Rakdos Carnarium, returning Command Tower to his hand. I play a Cinder Glade, and then cast Cultivate, searching my library for 2 basic lands, putting 1 into play tapped and the other into my hand. Shawn casts a Spellweaver Eternal, which has prowess, and then plays a Desert of the Mindful before attacking me for 1. Jason plays a Rogue's Passage and casts Mind Crank, making it so whenever an opponent loses life, they mill that many cards. Bilal plays a Command Tower and casts Talisman of Indulgence before moving to combat and attacking me for 1, milling me for 1 as well thanks to Mind Crank. I play a Mountain and cast Soul Ring before casting Malignus, which has power and toughness equal to half the highest life among my opponents, currently being a 20/20. Shawn casts his commander Adeliz the Cinderwind, which gives all his wizards +1/+1 whenever he casts an instant or sorcery spell. He then attacks me for 2 with Adeliz, Jason for 2, and Bilal for 1. When they do damage, I mill 2 cards and Bilal mills 1. Jason plays an island and casts Changeling Outcast, which can't block or be blocked. Bilal plays a Mortuary Mire, but doesn't have a creature in his graveyard, so he can't put anything on top of his library. He then casts his commander Prosper Tomebound, exiling a card in his end step and getting a treasure token whenever he plays a card from exile. Then, in his end step, he exiles a swamp. I play a Rogue's Passage, and then cast Mage Slayer. I equip Mage Slayer to Malignus, making it so that whenever he attacks, he deals damage equal to his power to defending player. This allows me to go to combat and attack Jason with Malignus. On attacks, the Mage Slayer does 20 damage to him, and then combat damage happens, doing another 20 damage, knocking Jason out of the game. On Shawn's turn, he casts Brainstorm, scrying 1, giving his team +1/+1, drawing 3 cards and putting 2 back on top of his library. He then casts Abrade, destroying the Mage Slayer, scrying 1 and giving his team another +1/+1. After that, he moves to combat, attacking me for 15 total damage with all of his wizards, including another 4 from Adeliz. On Bilal's turn, he casts Zorn, allowing him to make an additional treasure token whenever he creates any treasure tokens, and then plays the Swamp from exile, creating 2 treasure tokens. He immediately sacrifices the 2 treasure for mana, doing 2 damage to me, allowing him to cast Goldspan Dragon, letting his treasures sacrifice for 2 total mana and also creating a treasure when it attacks. He then attacks me for 6, creating 2 treasure tokens, and in his end step, he exiles a Soul Ring with Prosper. I play a Mountain and cast Kenrith's Transformation on Adeliz, turning her into a 3/3 elk with no abilities and drawing me a card. I then activate Rogue's Passage on Malignus, making him unblockable this turn, before moving to combat and attacking Bilal for 20 damage. In my second main phase, I cast Thud, sacrificing Malignus and doing 20 damage to Bilal since the sacrificed creature's power was 20, knocking him out of the game. But before he's fully gone, he sacrifices his treasures to do 2 damage to me. Shawn casts Chartercourse, scrying 1, giving Burning Prophet +1/+1, drawing 2 cards and discarding a card. He then plays a Mountain and casts Anticipate, scrying 1, giving the Prophet +1/+0, and looking at the top 3 cards of his library, putting 1 to hand and the rest on the bottom of his deck. He then moves to combat, attacking me for a total of 10, putting me down to only 1 life. On my turn, I cycle a Sheltered Thicket, and then play a Mountain, before casting my commander Arlinn Kord. I activate Arlinn's 0 ability, creating a 2/2 wolf token and transforming the Planeswalker. Then, since I've cast my commander, I cast Jeska Thrice Reborn, and activate her -1 ability to do 1 damage to Shawn, 1 to his Burning Prophet, and 1 to myself, going out on my own terms and winning Shawn the game. All right, so that was a sweet game. I'm not going to lie, this might be the first Commander game where someone has taken out 3 of the 4 players and still lost. I did hand Shawn the game at the end there by eliminating myself. I know that some people may be unhappy with that play. My line of thinking was if I could stop Adeliz, I might be able to survive for a turn, wipe the board, and keep going, but wasn't quite able to get there, so I did what I had to do, and I took myself out with Jessica instead of letting Shawn run me over with Wizards. But I do think everyone's deck kind of did what they wanted. I do feel bad that I knocked Jason out so quickly. He didn't quite get to do what he wanted to do, but he did let us know at the end that he did have the Dimir Guildmage in his hand, so he did have an infinite combo with the Mind Crank. He just didn't have the mana to activate it and knew that if he played it, we would all try to kill him. So that was a thing that happened. Bilal's deck was pretty terrifying, all things considered. He made a ton of treasures, and especially with Goldspan and Zorn at the end there, I think that if he had been given one more turn, I think he could have kind of gotten away from everybody and gotten himself out of reach. And then Shawn's deck just really got a ton of value. I was actually very impressed by the Wizards being able to churn through cards and scrying and drawing and then swinging for 15 plus damage with only 3 creatures on board. So I think it was very impressive. I think everyone did a very good job. I think the decks performed pretty well. Very short game overall this week, but I hope you still enjoyed it nonetheless. And if you have suggestions for future videos or for future cards you would like to see, do let me know. But other than that, I will see you all on the other side of the Dungeon Learner's Guide.